Okay, we call a meeting of the North Wpca to order at 5:31 p.m. for Monday, September 19th, 2022. Item number 2. Ralph.
Introduction of Nelia Bauer. She's our new wastewater systems manager. She came over from HDR and she's on the Zoom meeting for the first time. So
Welcome aboard, Ms. Bauer.
Hey, how are you? Hey.
You have any questions of the board? Or
Not at the moment, thank you, but it's nice to meet everyone.
does anybody on the board have questions for Ms. Bauer? Okay, you're welcome to stay. You don't have to, I think. I mean, I don't know what.
Nope, she's
Mr.
going
Marcin
to
told you.
participate.
Oh, okay. Just for introduction.
Part of the team now, so she'll be attending all the WPCA meetings.
Are we retiring Mr. Marcin? Where'd he go? Oh, there he is. Item number 3, is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes of September 1st, special meeting minutes?
So moved.
I see Mrs. Smith first. Are there any comments, corrections? Additions, deletions? Look, I didn't see anything. I don't hear anything. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, Ostafine, Bovee, Manila, Smith, Constantine, that passes unanimously. Thank you. Item number 3. Item number 4. Authorize interim chief of operations of public works to submit collection system master plan update to Connecticut DEEP. Is there a motion to authorize interim chairman? Mr. Constantine was first. Presentation from staff.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to introduce the team that will do the presentation. So this presentation, again, and Ralph, feel free to add anything if I miss. So this is in regards to the collection system master plan update that should be submitted to Connecticut DEP, and also as a response of the consent order that we have received. So here with us, we have Matt Todaro and also Eric Moore, and both who do a joint presentation. So we can explain and show the board what was the consent order of and what was the requirements that we had to fulfill, and on the technical portion of it, what we are proposing for it. So we're gonna need we need an action from the board at the end of the presentation, because our deadline to submit this to DEP is September 30th, if I'm not wrong. So that's why we want you guys to see what is the title of what we're going to be submitting to DEP. Ralph, I'm not sure if you want to add anything else to it.
Nope, everything you said, Vanessa, is correct. With the presentation that we're going to provide, I'll give a little bit of a background of the permit renewal process, and then that ties right into the consent order. And then we're following that up with the technical side from Brown and Caldwell with the collection system plan. So with that being said, I believe Matt's going to start the presentation and bring it up on the screen for everybody to view.
All right. Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, Ralph, for that introduction. Good evening to all. My name is Matt Todaro. I'm an environmental attorney and partner at Veril. And as always, it's my pleasure to present to this board. My portion of this presentation really is a focus on the administrative process that preceded the collection system master plan. And that includes the consent order currently in effect with the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, or DEEP. My primary goal of this presentation tonight is really to provide some clarity around the administrative process, how we got to this point in time. And my hope is that once my portion of the presentation is complete, it will be clear that the consent order, as Ralph alluded to, is really part of the permitting process that began a few years ago in the fall of 2020. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you think we can go just to the slide view show, because we're seeing the preview of the other slides on the screen as well. I think that will be easier to see.
Sure.
That worked.
Looks like that might not be allowing us to go into the full slideshow for some reason.
It's okay. Sorry about that.
No problem. All right, so here is a discussion outline. These are the items that we'll be covering in the presentation tonight. As I mentioned, first we'll be talking about some background on the permit renewal process. I'll then transition into the consent order and how those two processes were linked together and work together. We'll then talk about the collection system master plan at a high level, what the consent order requires, touch briefly on the facilities plan update because that's a portion of the consent order as well. And then I'll turn the floor over to Eric Muir of Brown and Caldwell, and he'll get into the details of what the collection system master plan actually entails. Next slide, please.
I think all you have to do is click on that slide, right? Number 3.
I think so.
Sorry, that's on my end. I'm not sure. Can you see the slide presentation now?
We can. I think that should go into full presentation mode. If not, this is fine as it is. All right. As some of you may know, the Clean Water Act at the federal level prohibits discharges into waters of the United States unless there is a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, or a NPDES permit that has been issued. And that NPDES permit is the permit that has been issued to the Norwalk Water Pollution Control Authority. The NPDES permits are issued on a 5-year rolling basis, and permittees must apply for that permit prior to the expiration of their current permit. As I mentioned at the outset, that's the process that started the process that we're in right now, which led to the consent order. Next slide, please. In Connecticut, the authority to issue and oversee the NPDES program is delegated from the US EPA to the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, or DEEP. DEEP has essentially a 7-step process for the renewal and reissuance of the NPDES permit. The first step in that process is the permittee, all the way on the left here, submits an application for the renewal of their permit 180 days before the expiration. Second step in that process is DEEP reviews the application for sufficiency and provides notice to the permittee that essentially your application is complete. DEEP then provides a technical review of the application and the draft permit, and they provide a 30-day public comment period on the draft permit once that's been released as a temporary or near final document. During that 30-day public comment period, DEEP will review any comments that it has received, and it makes a determination as to whether or not a public hearing is necessary or if it is requested. If it is requested or necessary, DEEP will hold that public hearing. And then the final step in the process is DEEP takes the input from that public process, may or may not revise the permit in some way, but then issues the permit as a final step. And that's essentially the process, next slide please, that Norwalk went through starting back in September of 2018, where it submitted its renewal application process. DEEP issued that notice of sufficiency about a month later. Took about 2 years for DEEP to review the draft permit, but in early September of 2020, it issued a notice of tentative determination to approve the draft permit. And what's important to note there is that DEEP, during that tentative determination to approve, issued a draft permit that was almost identical to the permit that had been in effect previously. DEEP then notified the public about the NPDES permit renewal process and solicited public comments for 30 days. An environmental organization that was involved in the process requested an extension of that 30-day period based on COVID parameters. They were granted that extension. Shortly thereafter, the environmental organization requested a public hearing on the permit. And during that public comment period, that extended period, 5 comments were submitted to the state agency DEEP, 1 from Wpca, 1 from the Wpca, 1 from the Mayor's Water Quality Committee, and then 2 from Save the Sound. As I mentioned, the environmental group Save the Sound had requested a public hearing, which DEEP proceeded to hold at the beginning of 2021, January 14th to be exact. It was held virtually due to COVID concerns. There were 2 presentations that were given at that public hearing. Ralph Kolb and Anthony Carr presented on behalf of the city and the Wpca, and Ann Strout, who is an employee of DEEP, presented on behalf of the agency. There was also a public portion of that hearing where the public was able to provide comments. Public was also able to submit comments, written comments on the public hearing as well. 13 comments were received by the department, including Save the Sound, again, the Mayor's Water Quality Committee, Harbor Watch, a local environmental organization, and a handful of other individuals from the public as well. A few months later, after considering the comments that had been received from the public and others, the department renewed the NPDES permit, and it went into effect with terms that were substantially similar to the prior permit, the permit that started this process back in the fall of 2020. What's important to note is that initially some of the public comments that were going to be included within the NPDES permit were later transitioned into the consent order process. The parties involved with the reissuance of the permit all agreed that a compliance agreement or a consent order, rather than the permit itself, would be the best way to encapsulate and really include those conditions going forward. So the consent order really is an outgrowth of that NPDES permit process, almost a continuation of the process, although it's a separate process in and of itself. So through 2021 and the early part of 2022, the Wpca and Connecticut DEEP negotiated the terms of the consent order, addressing some key collection system and facility upgrades. The consent order was discussed, as you all will likely remember, at a number of Wpca board meetings, some in executive session, some in public session in the fall of 2022, as well as in January, March, and April of 2022. And then in April of 2022, the board unanimously approved entering into the consent order, and then it was signed by the mayor May 5th of 2022. And that's really the process that led us through the permit and into the consent order. Now, the consent order has 2 primary components, one of which is a collection system master plan. And it's important to note that the Wpca had previously performed a collection system master plan back in 2009 and had already intended to perform a collection system master plan regardless of that consent order process. The master plan that is being performed, and again, Eric Muir will talk more about the specifics of the master plan. In addition to other items, it's designed to evaluate 2 items that are seen within the consent order. One is to remove excess flow to the collection system, cited as an example by the state as I&I, or inflow and infiltration. And the second is to eliminate the Ann Street siphon emergency overflow. Per the consent order, the Wpca had to retain a consultant. The Wpca retained Brown and Caldwell to perform the master plan update. And that master plan, as we've discussed a little bit at the outset of the presentation, is due to the state at the end of this month for approval. And finally, per the consent order, recommendations from the master plan that address this particular provision around excess flow in Ann Street must be completed within a 5-year period. As I mentioned, there's a second component to the consent order, 2 primary components, the first being the master plan, and the second is a facilities plan update. This is a process that starts later in the consent order cycle. So this facilities plan update is due to the state June 30th, 2023. So although some preliminary work has started here, we're not in a position to discuss that tonight. Just wanted to flag for this group that there are two components to the consent order, and this is the second. Finally, the one other deliverable within the consent order is that the WPCA will submit annual progress reports to Connecticut Deep on an annual basis at the end of June. The first progress report was submitted to DEEP at the end of June 2022. The department has not commented on that report, but that's an additional obligation within the consent order. All right, that concludes my portion of the presentation on the administrative background. I'll turn the floor over to Eric Muir of Brown and Caldwell to discuss the technical details of the master plan itself.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, Eric Muir. I'm an engineer with Brown and Caldwell. I'll take you through the master planning exercise that we went through. To kick us off here, the master plan development really started in earnest over a year and a half ago with a bunch of data collection. We put upwards of 40 flow meters in the collection system, scattered throughout Norwalk's collection system, and did a flow metering program to capture different storms of different levels of service, whether it's a 1-year storm, 2-year storm, 5-year, 10-year type storms. And then what we do with all that data is we build out a hydraulic model using as-built and data from Norwalk's GIS. We build a physical model of the collection system, and we input all that flow data and we calibrate it to different storm events. And that really becomes our tool to do different alternatives analysis to try to meet the consent order requirements. And so over on the right-hand side, you can see a picture of Norwalk's collection system that was put into the model with the bolder blue lines being some of the intercepting pipes, the red lines being the force mains or pumped systems, and then the yellow pieces there representing pump stations. Really what we found through that model through the flow metering campaign, the model development, and then alternatives analysis is that the collection system really performs exceptionally well. And it has nominal system-wide sanitary sewer overflows during 1- and 2-year storm events. The model approximates about 30 manholes will flood during a 25-year storm event. And the majority of those are located in the red boxes shown over to the right. We found that the Ann Street emergency overflow actually doesn't activate until a 100-year, 24-hour storm event. Really pretty exceptional in comparison to other Connecticut municipalities, a very high level of service or storm frequency. The Wall Street outfall activates at a 2-year, 6-hour event. And then finally, outfall 002, which is at the plant, activates during a 1-year, 6-hour storm event. And just as a reminder, those are flows that are exceeding the capacity, the 30 MGD capacity of the treatment plant, and they're diverted to that outfall 002, where historically they receive primary treatment before being discharged. A map representation of some of those extraneous flows that the consent order is referring to. What we do is we kind of map out where those are high and where they're low, so that we know where to go target collection system modifications. And so this is a heat map that kind of shows where there's high inflow or infiltration. Inflow is typically sourced from directly connected sources such as catch basins, and infiltration is generally groundwater or rainfall induced infiltration seeping through deficiencies in the sewer assets like the mains, the laterals, and then the manholes. In general, the meter areas closer to the interceptors show higher II rates. That kind of matches up with the age of the system. That's the core of the system are historically the older pipes. And the map on the right, I should have started with this. The darker the areas is a representative of the higher inflow and infiltration. And you'll see that those generally line up with those blue dots, which are representative of the connected catch basins that we know of in the system. So those are contributing a high inflow, and they're represented on that map. Next slide. So from all those model analysis and running different storms through the model and thinking about different engineering alternatives, we come up with master plan recommendations. The consent order, the consent order recommended modifications need to be completed over the next 5 years. And in order to meet the consent order, we developed measures that include these 4 bullets. One is to continue on doing normal operations and maintenance that incorporates the aspects of the EPA control standards and is generally good practice. That involves things like doing regular cleaning and inspection of the sewer lines so that we don't get areas that are filled up with debris and could cause backups. General good housekeeping that's conducted by the Wpca. The second is a capital project, includes the Hubbell's Lane relief sewer. This is a new piece of infrastructure built along Hubbell's Lane that would relieve a bottleneck in the collection system. And by building that, it would mitigate the overflows, including in the area of Wall Street, including the Wall Street structural overflow. So building that relief sewer relieves a hydraulic stress, and the flows are able to get to the plant a little easier. Thirdly, there's the recommendation of the disconnect of catch basins identified as significant inflow contributors. Those are the catch basins that were showed on that map. Engineering analysis has to be done to figure out which ones contribute high inflow and are cost effective to remove, and we disconnect those catch basins to get back some peak flows. And then finally, the Ann Street emergency overflow elimination, which was named in the consent order. Here will provide a physical barrier to eliminate overflows at that structure. The master plan will continue to go on after those consent order measures and recommend, much like in the last sewer master plan that Matt had referred to, put out their recommendations over a 20-year period as well. And these are long-term measures to include collection system performance. Many of the things the WPCA is already completing now on a regular basis through capital asset renewal projects. Conducting those projects will reduce additional extraneous flows and reduce additional stresses on the collection system, and will target those shaded areas that contribute higher inflow and infiltration. And finally, disconnection of any of the remaining catch basins that are found. This slide just kind of goes through a engineering cost estimate for the measures that were laid out. And so you can see on the left-hand side, the measures to meet the consent order, including the Hubbell Lane relief sewer, the Ann Street emergency overflow elimination, catch basin disconnections add up to about $16.5 million, including engineering and contingencies, construction, engineering, and contingencies. And then down below that, you'll see the long-term master plan recommendations show normal asset renewal over a 20-year life cycle, doing projects much like the WPCA does now, including lining of sewers, lining of manholes to reduce extraneous flows at a cost estimate of about $36.5 million. And for total costs adding up to almost $53 million. So the next steps include submitting that master plan update to DEP. by September 30th at the end of this month. The WPCA will then update its financial model to include the report recommendations, including the costs laid out in the table before. And then the WPCA will continue to update the board about status of the master plan and discussions with DEEP. And then begin implementing consent order and long-term recommendations after those discussions. And then the consent order requires that a progress report is due to DEEP annually on June 30th. So those updates will be conducted on an annual basis as we continue to refine recommendations and engineering analysis. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions?
I have a question.
I can't see everybody.
Again, this is Neil Constantine.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, so are these expenditures in line with cities of our size and other cities of our size? It's hard to tell, being new to the board, whether these are high or low or right where they should be. Anyone have any comment on that?
Hey, Eric, I guess with your experience with New London and Greater New Haven and NDC, could you speak on that?
Yeah. I would say they're generally they're not like an order of magnitude smaller or larger. So I would say they're generally in line with normal asset renewals that are needed for a collection system of this size and of this age.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I could say it's Ms. Smith.
Yeah, I just have a question in terms of, the 53 million over a period of 5 years.
Fair enough. I have a question.
I'm sorry. At 53 million over a period of 5 years, how does that break down annually? Because it a lot up front? Is it, about the same each of those 5 years?
So Barbara, let me answer that question. Going back to the one slide of the costs, it's about 16.5 million over 5 years. And then over a 20-year period, we're looking at almost 53 million.
I see. Okay.
So what I guess for the next 5 years, what we're going to have Woodard and Kern, who prepared our financial model, take that 16.5 million plus a little bit from the long-term bucket. And that's money that we anticipate spending over the next 5 years. So it's probably going to be front loaded because we actually have a $4 million project that's in design and we're looking to go out to bid next year. That's a long-term I&I project and sanitary sewer rehab. But then we're going to be looking right at Hubbell's Lane, going to design for that relief sewer and Ann Street. And then the catch basin disconnects will follow. So it's going to be front loaded early in the first 5 years. And then, as we go in design and construction, that money is available to continue on, to continue with the project. And we'll see how supply delays and complexity of the projects go. Because I know Hubbell's Lane, there is some complexity. We're looking to put a 60-inch sewer on Smith Street. And there's other utilities that we have to work around. So, but that's kind of what we envision at the moment.
Thanks, Ralph.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Mr. Manola.
Is there in the consent decree a required reduction in I&I, like a percentage or a volume that you're required to meet?
Chris, I can take that if I'm hearing you correctly, just from the textual side. There is not. I think the question was, is there a specific percentage in the consent order of I&I required to reduce within the collection system? And the answer is no. The language is to remove excess flow into the collection system. And then one of the ways you can do that was through I&I, but we could have proposed others. But my understanding is the outcome of the master plan analysis identified that there were some ways, including removing catch basins, the inflow, that would be, you know, most cost effective to do within the system.
Sure. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody else? Follow-up question to Chris's question. I suspect that I can't believe that Ann Street is only 100-year. That's amazing. It only overflows in a 100-year storm. I suspect the DEP wants to eliminate all overflow points, and if we were to eliminate I&I to the point where, say, it was a 500-year storm, they would still find the Ann Street siphon overflow objectionable. Is that right?
I guess, Darren, the question you're asking is it's a hard question to answer because it comes down to level of service. And Norwalk is one of 6 communities that have a combined system. And when you start comparing to Greater New Haven and MDC and Norwalk, we're really doing very well with during these large storm events where Ann Street would trigger at a 100-year storm event. Their level of service is much less than what Norwalk is. So, you know, you continue to invest into the collection system, into the city's assets, infrastructure, but as you make those improvements, the system continues to change. You have private laterals that made the grade. You have other pipes that start to get older. So the goal is to, you know, target the catch basins and continue to invest in the infrastructure for to reduce long-term SSOs in the system. You know, bringing Veolia in on the collection system side. We just purchased last year another Vector truck, so more cleaning, operations and maintenance of the system. So all those factors are going to help us get to, you know, our goals to continue to reduce sewer overflows out into the sound.
Okay, so we talked about if you close off the Ann Street overflow siphon, whatever you want to call it, that you would push backwater effect into the system and cause an overflow someplace else in the system. Right. So if we close the Ann Street system, are we going to look at making sure that we don't cause an overflow someplace else? Maybe that's a dumb question. You're not going to close the Ann Street siphon unless you check that stuff first. That's maybe a better way to put it.
Eric, do you feel good about taking this question?
Yeah, that's correct. We don't want to close something that's going to cause ill effects somewhere else. The objective is to remove extraneous flows and meet the consent order and have measures around that Ann Street elimination that don't make an impact worse.
Anybody else have any questions? Questions? None. Is your presentation done? No follow-up presentation? No? Everybody said what they wanted to say. Everybody asked what they wanted to say. There is a motion to authorize the interim chief of operations to submit the plan. Are we ready to call a question? Yeah. Okay. All in favor, say aye. Please raise your hand.
Aye.
Ostafine, Bovee, Smith, Constantine, Manella. That's unanimous. Thank you. 6:05. I think we're done with the business. Item number 5, contract operations report. Veolia.
Good evening, everybody. I will try to keep it quick. but I'll just go back and forth and cover topics for both months of July and August to keep it shorter. So the plant ran very well over the summer. We did have 2 instances where we had a daily bacteria exceedance, and they were both isolated incidences. One was due to a system that actually shut itself down. We had a chemical supply valve shut as part of a SCADA alarm or some SCADA programming that came in, shut the pumps off, and we went without chlorine feed for a short period of time. But unfortunately, that time period lined up with our daily bacteria testing, and we got a high number because we caught the sample right when that window came through. And then the second one in August, everything was operating normal. We collected a sample, and we believe there was a small piece of floatable grease or something that was in the top of that sample. And it was processed, and as a result created an elevated result because the follow-up test 2 days later was less than 10, and everything was normal at the plant. And, you know, both of these incidences, we did a lot of investigation. We looked at the sample techniques, we looked at process control, we looked at where floatables could have made their way through. And it was just something I wanted to mention to the board, that our sample regimen is very prescriptive, and we have zero flexibility in when and what time we can take samples. It's part of our permit. It's part of our QA/QC plan. So, for example, on this particular day, that sample had to be collected as a grab sample from the effluent at 11 o'clock that day. So, you know, we have to grab it then, and sometimes that can increase the chance of the sample not being representative. But we had a good investigation. We've had Arcadis and Ralph and the whole team involved in the SCADA problem, and we've got a good plan to get that fixed. As far as collection system, our team did a lot of work. In July, they did about 3.5 miles of TV inspection and 2.5 miles of sewer jetting. And then in August, they did a really kicked it into gear, and we had 5.8 miles of TV inspection and almost 8 miles of sewer cleaning. So it was an excellent month for the collection team. Otherwise, I did add at board's and Ralph's request, you now have a flow graph on the 3rd page of your executive summary. And there's 2 lines on that graph. One is the monthly average, and then the other line is the 12-month rolling average. So we can look at that on a monthly basis. And if you want to see any changes to that graph, certainly let me or Ralph know, and we'd be happy to customize it to meet your needs. Some other good news, we completed installation of all of our smart covers. So we now have 14 smart covers located throughout the collection system, and they're all reporting back information and have been really helpful in us evaluating the collection system. So that was our full contract obligation, and we've got them all in service now, which is great. I wanted to let everyone know, give you a little bit of update on the company. As most of you know, Suez and Veolia went through a merger earlier this year, and we've really gone through a lot of reorganization changes, but over the last couple of months, things have really stabilized, and I think we've got a long-term organizational structure that is, I think, very preferable to Norwalk. So we are part of the Northeast Contract Services Group, or Contract Operations Group, and my immediate supervisor is the Vice President of Central New England, Jason O'Brien, who many of you know and was involved with the project since the beginning. And Jason's boss now is the president of the Northeast Region for Contract Services, and she is new to the position. Her name is Kendra Morris. And Kendra, we have worked with quite a bit in Norwalk. She was our director of our innovation and new technologies. She's the one that brought the SL-RAT technology, the smart covers, and a number of other new technologies So she's very familiar with Norwalk. She likes working with us, and I guess I don't know the way to say it. The president has a preference for the Norwalk project. So for me, that's good, and for the city of Norwalk, that's good too. So one of the things she's done is she's holding a Northeast Project Managers Conference, and she selected Norwalk as the host city to do that. And that conference will be held the third week of October. It's going to be Monday through Wednesday, and it'll be held at the, we're going to go to the Lakota Oaks facility, because we've got a big group. We've got almost 170 managers coming from all around the Northeast United States, along with some of our executive and support teams. So we're really excited to host our big conference. It's really the first one we've had since COVID, and I know it's going to be a great city to have it in too. So we'll give you more information as we get closer to that. Let's see, Ralph, what else do I have on my agenda? Orchard Street, continue to put the final plans on that, but we're still scheduled for a November implementation of that project. And currently we don't have any new or out of scope items on our agenda. And that's it. But as always, if anyone has any questions, happy to answer them.
Thanks. Any questions? No, no questions. Reports, I guess that's you, Ralph.
Yep. So item 6A, including the board package, is our typical munis report. Copies included for everyone. Moving on, item B, we have a copy of an EPA letter in reference to the administrative order on consent. This was dated, I think, September 1st. EPA actually called me to let me know before this came out. Basically, typically AOCs from EPA are not closed out officially, but what the EPA is doing is they sent us a letter to tell us that effective immediately, we no longer have to submit monthly reports or an annual CMOM report. So Norwalk is doing a good job, and EPA is issued this letter to allow our resources, the Veolia team and WPCA staff, to continue working on other projects like the consent order with the state and our capital improvement projects. So it was really a positive letter that we received from EPA.
Ralph, if I may add, I'll just add to that you know, I represent a number of entities involved with the US EPA, and it's not often that you receive a letter like this. EPA doesn't issue these letters without a significant amount of internal consideration. So the fact that Norwalk is receiving a letter like this really is a nice indication that the team over the span of the administrative order on consent has done a fantastic job on two different fronts, both complying with the technical items within the AOC, the reports, the analyses, things like that, but also developing a good working relationship with the regulators, which is not always easy to do as well. So I will just add kudos to the team for getting themselves and putting themselves in a position where the agency, US EPA, would issue a letter like this.
Thank you, Matt.
If I may add to that, you know, I'd really just like to commend the whole team for the great work that you have been doing. You know, Ralph, you alluded to this earlier when we were talking about the master plan and the cost of it. And I think that, you know, from everything that I have learned, Norwalk is way ahead of the game, you know, in terms of some of the other coastline cities, you know, just in terms of maintenance and moving us forward. I think that you know, the consent order certainly did raise a few eyebrows, but we understand, you know, through your presentation that, you know, this is good for the city. It's good for Long Island Sound. And I just, you know, you've just done a great job. So just had to say that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Speaking of the team, moving on to the next item, discussion on water pollution control facility plan update. So next month, we're going to invite the Arcadis team to attend the WPCA meeting, so you get to meet the faces. We actually have a kickoff meeting this Wednesday on that project. And one of the things that we're going to ask the board members next month, if anybody's interested, to have a subcommittee, maybe 2 members, meet up with us on occasion. So that way we can, some of the alternatives that we're going to be talking about and start planning, you guys can be involved in, and then we can all report back to the 9-member board on the monthly meetings. So that's where we're headed at the moment on the facility plan. Moving on to the next item, the DPW, fire department, EMS, PD open house is October 1st at the Public Works Center between the hours of 9 a.m. and 12 o'clock p.m. noon. So there's a flyer in there. Please attend. It's lots of fun. The Veolia team is going to give tours of the treatment plant. So can't wait. Hopefully we'll have a good turnout, usually about 2,000 people. Next item E, sewer use bills appeals to date is $39,341. And there's no information copies.
Does anyone have any questions on the report section of the agenda? Does anyone have any questions on anything on the agenda at all? Does anyone have any questions on anything that might not be on the agenda? Would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, I see Mr. Bovee got that one first. It is 6:17 p.m. All in favor, say aye and raise your hand, please.
Aye.
Define Bovee, Constantine, Smith. We are adjourned. Thank you very much. I'll see you all on October 17th, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Night, everyone.